All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today, we're taking on a question that's been pondered for centuries. When does human life actually begin?
A pretty big question, right?
Definitely. And to help us unpack it, we've got this intriguing scientific paper titled Fundamentos Genéticos del Comienzo de la Vida Humana.
Which translates to genetic foundations of the beginning of human life.
Exactly. And it's authored by Dr. Ricardo Cruz Koch, a leading figure in medicine and genetics from the University of Chile.
He's a pretty prominent guy in the field.
Absolutely. And this paper was published in a special 50th anniversary edition of a scientific journal, so you know they considered it a big deal.
Definitely a significant piece of work.
Now, Dr. Cruz Koch starts off by going way back, like to 18th century Spanish dictionaries.
Wow, that's going back a bit.
Yeah, he's looking at the historical definitions of terms like conception, fertilization, and fetus. He's laying the groundwork by showing how these terms have long been associated with the creation of a new being.
Kind of setting the stage with a historical context.
Exactly. It's fascinating how he uses these historical definitions to build his argument. Then he dives into the nitty-gritty of fertilization.
Yeah, and the biological nuts and bolts.
Right. He explains how a sperm and an egg, each with 23 chromosomes, come together to form a zygote with a full set of 46.
Like two halves coming together to make a whole.
Yeah, a perfect analogy. But the key takeaway here is that Dr. Cruz Koch argues that this fusion of genetic material, creating a unique mix of chromosomes, is the moment a new, distinct individual is created.
So he's pinpointing fertilization as the defining moment.
That's right. He emphasizes that the zygote isn't just any cell, it's the primordial cell, the very first cell of a new human being.
It's like the foundation stone of a new life.
Absolutely. It contains all the genetic information needed to guide the development of that individual. Think of it like a blueprint for a skyscraper. Everything's there, even though it hasn't been built yet.
Love that analogy. So we have the blueprint, but how does it get put into action?
Good question. Dr. Cruz Koch then takes us on a journey into the molecular magic of how this genetic information is actually transmitted.
It gets pretty complex here.
Yeah, he gets into the specifics of DNA replication.
The nitty-gritty of genetics.
Right. He points out that DNA replication is a semi-conservative process, meaning each new DNA molecule has one original strand from the parent cell and one newly synthesized strand. This means the zygote ends up with a totally unique DNA structure, further cementing its status as a new and distinct being.
So it's not just a copy, it's something entirely new.
Exactly. It's like making a copy of a recipe but adding your own little twist each time, creating something unique. And to drive home this point, Dr. Cruz Koch uses a really interesting analogy. He compares the zygote's genetic code to a recorded tape.
Oh, I like where this is going.
He's saying that the music of life is played out according to the instructions on that tape encoded in the DNA. This music, this unfolding of life, continues from that first cell division all the way to old age.
It's like a symphony playing out over a lifetime.
A beautiful way to put it. He does such a great job of connecting this complex biological process back to the question of when life begins. But does that mean our lives are completely predetermined by our genes?
That's a question that's been debated for ages.
Right. Like, are we just robots following a script?
Well, Dr. Cruz Koch acknowledges that genes aren't everything. They provide the basic blueprint, but there's still room for individual choices and free will to shape who we become.
So it's not all set in stone. There's a dance between our genes and our environment, our choices and our experiences. But that initial blueprint, that unique combination of genes, is set at fertilization.
It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Absolutely. Now, you might be wondering about the different stages of development we see in the womb.
Yeah, like how does that fit into the picture?
Dr. Cruz Koch takes us through those stages, from the blastocyst to the embryo to the fetus, but not to figure out when life begins. He uses these stages to emphasize that development is a continuous process, an unfolding of the blueprint already set at fertilization.
It's like saying a story doesn't begin on the last page. It starts with that very first sentence, that initial spark.
Exactly. And to further support his argument, Dr. Cruz Koch brings in some really compelling evidence.
Like what?
Well, have you ever thought about how identical twins fit into all of this?
That's an interesting angle.
They actually provide a powerful example. Identical twins develop from a single fertilized egg, meaning their individual identities, their unique genetic blueprints, are established even before they implant in the womb. It's as if the story splits into two volumes. but both come from the same source.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. So even though they share the same DNA, they're distinct individuals from the get-go.
Exactly. It really underscores how that initial fusion of genetic material is so crucial in creating a unique human being.
It's like each twin is a unique melody played on the same instrument.
I love that analogy. And it gets even more fascinating. He talks about imperfect twins, where slight genetic differences arise during those early cell divisions. He even brings up cases of hermaphrodites, individuals with both male and female cells.
Wait, hermaphrodites? How do they fit into this?
It is complex, but Dr. Cruz-Coke uses these cases to show that even within a single individual, distinct genetic identities can be established during fertilization. It lends further support to his idea that the zygote is where a new human life truly begins.
Like different sections of the orchestra playing slightly different tunes, but still following the same overall score.
Another great analogy. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from 18th century definitions to the intricacies of DNA and even the mysteries of twins and hermaphrodites. It's clear that Dr. Cruz-Coke has built a pretty compelling case for fertilization being the defining moment when a new human life begins.
He's brought together a lot of different threads to support his argument.
Definitely. And he doesn't shy away from connecting these scientific findings to bigger philosophical questions. It's not just about biology, it's about what this means for how we view human life, individuality, even the concept of personhood.
Some pretty heavy stuff to ponder.
For sure. And that's something we'll delve into further in the next part of our deep dive.
Picking up where we left off, Dr. Cruz-Coke really stresses that these findings have implications way beyond the lab.
Right, it's not just theoretical.
Exactly. He actually draws parallels to the work of physiologists who are creating human life in the lab, through in vitro fertilization.
It's like science fiction becoming reality, but it also kind of adds another layer of evidence to this idea that a unique human being comes into existence at fertilization.
Right. If scientists can pinpoint that moment in a lab, it really strengthens the argument that life begins at fertilization, not at some later stage.
Absolutely. And Dr. Cruz-Coke brings in perspectives from outside science, too.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
He cites a document from the Vatican on abortion.
That's a pretty different perspective.
Yeah, highlighting how this concept of fertilization as the beginning of life isn't just a scientific idea, but it has deep roots in philosophical and theological discussions, too.
It's like he's showing how this debate has been going on for centuries in different fields.
Exactly. It's fascinating how this paper weaves together these different strands of thought, but it's important to remember we're just exploring these ideas, not taking sides.
Right, we're just trying to understand the different perspectives presented in the source material.
Exactly. It's about understanding the breadth and depth of this whole discussion.
And he even connects his argument to the legacy of Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics.
Wait, Mendel, the pea plant guy, what does he have to do with the beginning of human life?
Well, remember how Dr. Cruz-Coke emphasizes that unique combination of genes at fertilization? Mendel's work on inheritance patterns laid the foundation for our understanding of how those genes are passed down from parents to offspring. It's like Mendel gave us the key to unlock the secrets of heredity, and Dr. Cruz-Coke is using that key to explore the very beginning of a human being's existence.
Wow, it's amazing how seemingly unrelated fields can converge on such a fundamental question. It's not just about pea plants anymore, it's about understanding the building blocks of what makes us human.
And he also links his argument to things like the Hippocratic Oath in medicine and the teachings of Christianity.
Okay, so he's branching out into ethics and morality now.
Yeah, he sees a common thread running through these different disciplines, a respect for the inherent value and sanctity of human life from its very beginning.
So it's not just a scientific argument, it's a moral and ethical one as well.
Exactly. He's saying that our understanding of genetics has huge implications for how we view and treat human life at all stages of development. He's challenging us to really think deeply about what it means to be human and when that human life begins. And in his concluding remarks, he makes this powerful statement, arguing that genetics provides a decisive foundation for recognizing the right to life of the fetus from the moment of conception.
Wow, that's a strong statement. So he's calling for a shift in perspective, a recognition that the scientific evidence points toward a fundamental respect for human life from its very beginning.
He even calls on his fellow medical geneticists to join him in advocating for the protection of the unborn. He uses a powerful quote, "Sube a nacer conmigo, hermano," which translates to, "Rise up to be born with me, brother."
That's beautiful, and it really brings home the emotional and ethical weight of this whole discussion, and it leaves us, the listeners, with a lot to grapple with. How do these scientific findings inform our own views on the beginning of human life?
And that's the point of a deep dive like this, right?
Yeah.
It's not about giving easy answers. It's about prompting us to think critically, engage with these complex ideas, and maybe even challenge our own assumptions.
It's about encouraging us to go deeper to explore the so what behind the information. And in this case, the so what is pretty significant. We're talking about fundamental questions of human existence, individuality, and the very beginning of life. And while Dr. Cruz Koch makes a strong case for fertilization as that defining moment, he also acknowledges that there's more to the story. He distinguishes between the beginning of life and the beginning of personhood.
Ah, yes, that's a crucial distinction that often gets lost in these discussions.
Can you explain that a little more? What's the difference between being a human life and being a person? Because I think a lot of people use those terms interchangeably.
It's a question philosophers have been debating for centuries.
Hmm.
Some believe that personhood is tied to certain cognitive abilities like self-awareness, rationality, or the ability to make moral judgments. Others argue that personhood is inherent from the moment a human being comes into existence.
So there's a whole spectrum of thought on when and how personhood emerges. It's not a simple black and white issue.
Exactly. And Dr. Cruz Koch doesn't try to impose a definitive answer. He acknowledges the complexity of the concept and invites us to consider how his scientific findings about the beginning of life might inform our understanding of personhood.
It's like he's saying, here's the scientific evidence. Now let's have a thoughtful and nuanced conversation about what it means for us as individuals and as a society. It's a challenging but important conversation to have.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And by engaging with different perspectives and considering the evidence carefully, we can hopefully move toward a more informed and compassionate understanding of this complex issue.
Well said. I think Dr. Cruz Koch would be proud of us for taking on this challenge and wrestling with these big questions. He ends his paper with a call to action, urging his fellow scientists to defend the right to life from the moment of conception. But he also leaves us with a reminder that we are all part of the human family, regardless of our stage of development.
It's a reminder that science, ethics, and philosophy are not separate disciplines, but intertwined threads that weave the tapestry of human understanding.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. We've explored the science of fertilization, the complexities of personhood, and the ethical implications of it all.
It's been a truly thought-provoking deep dive. And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to continue the conversation. Share your thoughts, your questions, your own deep dives into this topic. Let's keep learning and growing together.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. We've explored so much in this deep dive, from the science of fertilization to the complexities of personhood.
And as we wrap up our exploration of Dr. Cruz Koch's paper, I think it's worth highlighting one more fascinating point.
Okay, lay it on me.
He distinguishes between the biological beginning of human life, the physical part, and what he calls the beginning of the human psyche.
Okay, so we've talked about life beginning at fertilization, but now we're adding another layer, the psyche. What does he mean by that?
Well, he's suggesting that while the zygote has the potential, the biological potential, to develop a human psyche, this doesn't happen right away at fertilization.
So it's not like flipping a switch.
It's more like a gradual process that unfolds as the embryo develops.
Okay, I'm following you.
He actually points to the development of the nervous system, especially the brain, as a key factor in this emergence of the human psyche.
That makes sense. The brain is like the command center, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, everything that makes us human.
Exactly. And Dr. Cruz Koch emphasizes how the human brain undergoes significant development throughout pregnancy and even after birth. It's a really complex and dynamic process.
So when does he say this human psyche actually begins? Does he give us a timeline?
He doesn't pinpoint a specific moment, like day 32 or week 15. Instead, he proposes it's more of a gradual unfolding with certain milestones along the way.
Okay, so like markers of development.
Yeah. He mentions things like the development of brainwave activity, the ability to perceive senses like touch or sound, and even the emergence of those early forms of consciousness. These are all indicators of that developing psyche.
It's like a dimmer switch, slowly getting brighter over time rather than a light suddenly switching on.
Perfect analogy. And he really emphasizes how this whole process of psyche development adds another layer of complexity to the discussion of when human life begins.
Right, it's not just about the physical body, it's also about the emergence of the mind, of consciousness.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the concept of personhood, which we talked about earlier. While Dr. Cruz Koch argues that biological human life begins at fertilization, he acknowledges that the question of when personhood begins, Well, that's a lot more nuanced and open to philosophical debate.
It's like he's saying science can tell us when life begins, but it can't definitively answer the question of when a person, with all its moral and ethical implications, truly comes into existence.
And I think that's really powerful. He leaves that question open for us to grapple with, urging us to consider the scientific evidence alongside our own philosophical, ethical, even spiritual beliefs.
This has been quite a journey. We've explored the intricacies of genetics, the complexities of fetal development, and these profound questions surrounding the beginning of human life and the emergence of the human psyche.
It's a topic that really pushes us to think deeply, to engage with different perspectives, and to honestly wrestle with the implications of these scientific discoveries for how we view ourselves and our place in the world.
And if any of our listeners are feeling inspired to delve a little deeper, we've got a link to Dr. Cruz Koch's full paper in the show notes. It's a great read for anyone who wants to explore these ideas further.
And we'd love to hear from you too. What are your thoughts on all of this? Any burning questions? Share your reactions, share your own deep dives into this topic. Let's keep the conversation going.
It's been another thought-provoking deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.